Now that you have a sense of the kinds of theoretical approaches we can take to science fiction, I want to talk about some basic guidelines for reading particular types of texts. And what we're looking for here is texts that are either metaphorical or allegorical. And what I mean by this, metaphor, I think most of you will understand, but I might as well explain it. Metaphor is when we describe one thing as another. We describe something that is not that thing, but that shares some characteristics. And because we understand the two parts of the metaphor, the thing being described and the thing that's used to describe it, we see something new in the thing that's being described. Now, the way this is broken out into pieces is the thing that's being described is called the tenor, and the thing that's describing it is called the vehicle. So we understand the vehicle, and the vehicle gives us a new way of looking at the tenor. Metaphors like, lots of metaphors for love. If I say love is a rose, it gives you certain ideas about it. If I say love is hell, it gives you different ideas about it. And in these cases, we look at what are the characteristics of a rose and how do they match up with love, or what are the characteristics of hell and how do they match up with love. And hopefully, by understanding the metaphor, you'll get the author's intention. If I say love is like hell and you say, oh, it must be pretty hot, that's probably not what I mean. I probably mean that it's endless torture or something along those lines. So we look at the metaphors, we look at the tenor and how it connects to the vehicle, and it gives us a new understanding of the thing that's being described. Now, there's a form of metaphor that's even more involved, and this is what we call allegory. An allegory is a story which functions metaphorically. So you understand the entire story, it makes sense as it is, it holds together on its own, but it doesn't necessarily amount to all of the meaning. There's something within that story that applies to something else. So once we understand the story, we understand that there's something more than what's going on in that story. Classic example of this is George Orwell's Animal Farm. So at the surface level, understanding the vehicle, the thing that's doing the describing, we see a book about a farm with some animals on it, and the animals can talk, and they have certain power structures, power relationships that they take on in the story. If we understand it as an allegory, we see that those animals are not just animals. They represent certain types of people. They represent certain types of political stances. They are a criticism. And in this case, it's generally assumed that Orwell was writing about a farm, but what he was really doing was being critical of communism. So this is how an allegory works. And the reason I bring these up is because in many cases, the kinds of texts that we're going to be reading in this class function allegorically. They tell you a story about something that's going on in the future, but if you pay attention to clues, what you'll find is the thing in the future that's being emphasized actually refers back to something that's going on in our own time and is critical of it. Now, these can be frightening, they can be humorous. There are lots of things you can do with allegory. I'm going to start with a little bit of humorous allegory. I don't know how many of you have seen this film. We are going to watch it and analyze it in this class, and it's called Idiocracy. And it's humorous. It's often not taken very seriously, but it does contain a great deal of social criticism within it. So if we look at the forms of entertainment that are used in Idiocracy, which takes place a couple hundred years in the future, the number one form of entertainment at that time is a television show which is called, pardon my French, but it's called Ow My Balls. And the show is just shot after shot of people, of one particular guy being hit in the crotch with wrecking balls, and it's just about anything you can think. And it's humorous because it's so ridiculous. At the same time, it's a little bit troubling because the show is so similar to Jackass or Wipeout or America's Funniest Home Videos. It has direct parallels to things that I myself watch and that I myself enjoy. And so I look at this and I say, it's criticizing them in the future for liking this particular kind of thing. But if they're to be criticized for it, why aren't we? So it's pretty clear here that there's an allegorical function going on here with the text criticizing what's going on in the modern world. All right, so if you look at allegory, we see stories that refer to something else, stories that somehow comment back on something else. Another similar type of writing is what we call satire, and satire is looking at something and saying, I'm going to take the characteristics of that and expand them to an extent that it makes that thing look ridiculous. So again, Ow My Balls as a comment on something like Wipeout. It's saying, you are laughing at people getting hurt. let's take that to the extreme and just over and over again do the thing that gets the most laughs, and it makes it seem ridiculous. So a lot of what goes on in dystopian science fiction is a form of satire. It's a form of humorous exaggeration of things that are going on in our own culture. Sometimes the humorous things in it are very, very dark humor. So the first book we're going to be looking at is Player Piano. And Player Piano functions around the idea that people can be replaced by machines. And if we replace people with machines, those people won't have anywhere to go. Now, it's very dark, and really, I think it could only be stomached by people reading it in the 1950s by the idea that it's so distant from where we are now, that it's talking about only a very distant possibility, something that is not likely to happen, and so we can watch it comfortably. I find that as years go on, the more I read this, and I've read the story many, many times, but the more I read Player Piano, the more it troubles me. And I don't miss the irony of the fact that right now, what I'm doing is exactly what the characters in this book were doing in 1952, which is they're creating technology which does the exact same thing that they do, and basically writing themselves out of jobs. And here I am recording a lecture on a video camera, which can be duplicated as many times as possible. Okay, and it freaks me out. But that's basically what's going on in Player Piano. Everything we're going to read in this class to some extent functions as a form of satire. So keep that in mind while you're reading.